environments I've been in, but I tell you, I believe Dan led us and we hit it out of the park today. That camp music will get you fired up, won't it? Get you ready to just praise the one who did all the good things for us, and so I appreciate that. Now, before we get into our message today, there's some folks I'd like to recognize. I believe we have a young lady that's celebrating a birthday. Marianne, when is your birthday? Yesterday, celebrated yesterday. Friday. Okay, celebrated Friday. Okay, now can we? Her third day apart. It's birthday week for Marianne, isn't it? All right. Got her family with her today. Now, can we say how old you turned? Okay, tell us. Huh? Can you not tell us? 90. 90 years young. Now, me and her son are still trying to figure out how in the world she has so much more hair than we do. So I tell you what, Clyde, it's what a wonderful, wonderful lady you have for mom. We're so proud of you, and thank you for sharing with us. I don't know if you saw the kids. They're a little bit hyped up today. It's from eating all that cake that they brought. Man, that's the biggest birthday cake I've seen. But we just appreciate that. And, you know, we've got a couple of our folks who have been sick and back with us today. I saw Avis Sinclair sitting over there. Glad to have Avis back with us. She's been out of commission for a while. And Deetra, I saw Deetra earlier. Deetra's back. We're so glad that she's healing up and able to be with us. And my wife, Sandy, is back today. She's scooting around on that little scooter. I was talking with Stu one day this week, and I believe they said they're going to get matching T-shirts, the Scooter Club, you know. But it's great to just have our friends back together. Again, I look forward to our times of worship together. And is Jack with us? Where's Jack at? Hey, Jack's with us. I didn't even see you back there, brother. You're sitting behind that Connors boy. I can't see you back there. Man, we're glad to have you with us. Jack spent over a week in the hospital here recently and got some good nursing at home from Kathy. So we're so glad that Jack's back with us today. I appreciate that. Man, that even makes the day even better. You know, as we have been going through this Believe series, we've touched on some wonderful things, and today we're on something that I think is very important for us to talk about because Jesus talked about it. Jesus talked about what we're going to discuss today more than he talked about heaven and more than he talked about hell put together, and that is our resources, our finances, our money. And the reason why Jesus talked about that so much is because he knew that would hit home. He would say things like, where your treasure is, or where your heart is, that's where your treasure is, you know, or where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. He would keep teaching that and pounding that in his followers for 3.5 years because he knew that would strike a chord. That would really separate the wheat from the chaff if we would decide who really owns everything. And we're just simply stewards of what God has blessed us with. And you know, when we think about our life, there's a lot of things that cause fear, that causes stress and anxiety in our life. But boy, there's few things that we face that causes more stress than being poor or being broke or being destitute. We fear that. We fear not having enough money to pay our bills or having enough saved up for our retirement years. We spend a lot of time worrying about money to buy more stuff, and that consumes so much of our time. And in our consumer-minded culture, we worry entirely too much about money. We bought into Satan's lies and we went into it hook, line, and sinker. But God has such a bigger plan for your life than that. He doesn't want us to be tied down and burdened and caught in Satan's trap. because that brings fear and anxiety to a people that's called to be His witnesses. And we can't be good witnesses and we can't make disciples of others if we spend our time being wrapped up in fear and anxiety. And I don't know if you noticed our sign out front, but man, it's so powerful. And the sign, and a marquee sign out at the front edge of our property, has this statement on it. And it's talking really about fear, because the opposite of fear is safety. And Yeshua, Jesus, He is the only safety that we'll ever have in this life. And that statement out on the sign says, Jesus is our rock. Outside of Him, there is no safety. Inside of Him, there is no fear. And so Jesus needs to be everything to us, to help us to make it through this life. And He wants us to have life that's truly life. So, if we're going to talk about our resources, and again, it's going to be today, we're talking about our finances. God, who is the creator of everything, we have to ask ourselves, why would God, who has created everything, who owns everything, why would He ask of us to give back something to Him? I mean, seriously, what can our little, minute, minuscule amount that we give back do anything for God? Why would God want us to give back a portion of our resources? Well, first, if you've even read through any of the scriptures, you'll see that God in the very beginning would ask of His people to give back to Him as an act of worship and honor for Him. And God instructed His people in the Old Testament time, when He had chosen this people to be His priesthood, this people that's going to make a difference in the world. He instructed them and gave them the parameters in which they should live. And He says, when you have a harvest that comes in, I want you to give me back of the first fruits. I want you to return back to me the best of your crops, the best of your herds and animals and things that you're gaining, the best of your resources. Give back a portion of that to me first. Put me first. And if we do that, then we're showing that we're worshiping Him. We're saying, God, I'm not going to give you what's left over. I'm not going to give you the scraps, the remainder. I'm going to think of you first. And I'm going to give back to you first. And in doing that, I'm obeying you and I'm honoring you. And that's what God instructs. If you would study through the Old Testament, He tells us to do that. And that's the only key for us to really put things in the right perspective. Even though we know that is the case, practically, it's hard for us to do. It's hard for us to manage that, because we start thinking, well, that just doesn't really make sense. It doesn't add up. I mean, I'm barely making it as I am. How could I give back to God more if I'm barely paying my bills and not giving God any? As we have said earlier today, it's an act of faith. And I can assure you, you talk to a seasoned veteran of the cross, you talk to an old saint who has lived their life and been through the stages that you're in right now, they will tell you, you cannot outgive God. But it doesn't make sense. Which leads me to the second reason why God wants us to give back to Him. It shows our trust in Him. God's equation is nothing like the world's equation. God says, if you give to me first, you're going to be able to do more with what you have than if you would have kept all of it. The world says, get everything you can, and you hoard it, you take it in, and don't share because you're going to need that later. God says, absolutely false. Trust me. You give to me first and see if I won't pour out a blessing. See if I won't just meet your needs and provide for you and all the things that you need in your life. And then thirdly, one of the reasons why God wants us to give back to Him first is because He knows that we are greedy people. We really are. We, by just our very nature, are greedy people. But when we become Christians, we need to leave that old way of life. We need to leave that old way of thinking. And how are we going to change if we don't follow God's instructions? How are we going to be different than we were before we became Christian? So God asks of us to practice stewardship and practice giving back to Him to keep us from slipping back into that old nature of being greedy. Now you may say, well, I'm not a greedy person. I don't feel like I'm a greedy person. Well, let me just walk through the phases of life. Little children, just say a little 18-month to 3-year-old child. When you give them a toy, they're okay, aren't they? They play for a little toy. They'll gnaw on whatever that you got. You know, it's pretty cool. But you put two little children together and give them one toy, what happens? They're greedy, aren't they? They're greedy. And you take young kids, and you know, again, in our culture today, we just pour out so much to our kids. We take young kids and we buy them all this stuff, and they'll have toys they hadn't played with in years. I mean, years. But then you bring a friend over that's got a child, and you put those two kids together, and that toy that hadn't been touched in 2 years all of a sudden becomes precious. Don't touch my toy. And you say, well, you hadn't played with that in years. Why do you care about it now? Because we're, by nature, greedy people. You say, well, we outgrow that. We outgrow that. All right, let's go to the next phase of life. Let's look at teenagers. You know, there's an old saying that 2's company and 3's a crowd. You take 2 teenagers together, and they're pretty good. They get along good, laughing, texting, joking. But then you add a third person to the mix, and what happens? Somebody's going to get left out, aren't they? Not greedy over stuff so much, but we're greedy over attention and friendships. Well, you say, well, that's adolescent years. I'm not greedy. I'm an adult. I'm a mature person now. I'm more sophisticated than that. Okay, all right, I'm with you. If you have siblings, kind of like what Dan was asking about earlier, if you have siblings and something happens to your family, and there becomes an inheritance, and there's no will to specify who gets what. I have seen some of the most loving families divided and torn up over stuff, over money. You don't want the other one to get more than you got. You'll rationalize all kinds of things, but the gist of it is you come back to being greedy. You know, money is the second leading cause of divorce in America. Truly it is. Money or lack thereof that puts stress on life. It's a tool that Satan has used to become something that's divisive. It's because we spend too much time worrying about it. So God says, I want to take you out of that, and I want you to think about things a little bit differently. I want you to look at things from my perspective. It's just a tool, folks. It's just a means to an end. It is not anything that's going to have a future to it. God would tell us today, and He's about to as we look into His Word, that everything we have in this life, one day we're going to have to give up. It's not going to provide any kind of security outside of this life, so we need to change how we think about it. And so I want you to turn to a very familiar passage in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21 gets into one of those inheritance questions that I talked about earlier. You know, when a family has to start dividing up the estate. It was on an occasion just like that Jesus finds himself, and Luke records this in great detail for us. So Luke chapter 12, starting with verse 13. Then one from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me judge or an arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of things he possesses." Life does not consist in the things that you possess. They are just simply tools that you're a steward over. So God has placed those things in your life to help you get through life. We need finances to help us to get through life, to buy the things that we need, food, clothing, and shelter. But we've become such a culture that puts so much prominence on stuff that God says, I want to change the way you think about it. And today, church, hear what God has to say. Jesus says, "Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided?" God says, I blessed you with this great surplus. I have given you far beyond what you need. I have given you an abundance. What are you going to do with it? Well, this parable includes a man who says, well, I'm not going to give any of it away. No. I'm going to tear down my little puny barns, and I'm going to build me some big ones. And I'm going to store it up so that I will just be able to kick back and take it easy. I'm not going to have to worry about getting out there and tilling that soil up again. I'm just going to live off of everything that I've got. You see, when we start using those personal pronouns, I, me, all of those things that indicate we're thinking about us, God says, how foolish. How foolish of you. I gave you all of this, and what are you going to do? You're going to hoard it? You're going to store it up, and you're going to say, I'm just going to live off of it for the next several years. I don't have to do anything. God says, you don't even know, but tonight, you're going to draw your last breath in this life. You're going to die tonight. And then who is going to get all of this stuff you stored up for yourself? You're going to leave it all behind. That's pretty strong language from the Lord, isn't it? That's a lot of teaching in that one little parable. There's so much that we need to understand about our resources. They don't belong to us. We cannot keep them. Somebody else is going to get them one day when we pass on, or if in our lifetime the stock market crashes, which it's inevitable. It's going to go down. Oh, we celebrate when it has these record highs, but friends, as fast as a balloon goes up, a balloon can bust, can't it? And be gone in an instant. You can store that stuff up and say, well, I don't believe in the stock market. I'm just going to store my stuff up. Man, a lightning strike can start a house fire that'll burn everything you got up. Or some people come in your home to do a little home repair, look around, see your stuff. They can come back when you're going on vacation and take every bit of it. Or big old tree fall on your house, rain comes in, destroys everything. You see, don't put your treasures on the earth where the moth can eat it up, rust can destroy, and thieves can come in and steal. But store up your treasure in heaven. Be good stewards of what God has blessed you with. Fool, this very night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he, this is the words of Jesus, this is the application for us, so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So the question for you is, are you rich towards God? Are you being a blessing back to the one who blessed you with it initially? What are you doing with what you've been given? What are you doing with your resources? It's not about getting bigger vehicles, buying bigger homes, additional homes. It's not about having better cable services or whatever. You know, we get into this entertainment industry and we think it's all about us, and Satan just sits back with his old clawed up hands rubbing together saying, yeah, got them right where I want them. And we miss out on the best part of living. God says, so it is with everyone who stores up for themselves but is not rich toward God. And Paul carries that theme over as he's talking to the Corinthian church. In that second letter, he's at the point where he's talking about the church taking up a collection to help the needs of other churches. There was a great persecution on the church. And there were so many who had lost homes. They had lost jobs. They had lost everything because of Jesus. Because their families kicked them out. They said, you're following those strange gods. No, you either change back and you start worshiping like I worship, or we're going to kick you out. Well, they said, I can't turn my back on Jesus. So they were kicked out. They were in need. And so the churches who were so blessed would take up an offering to help those other churches who were starving to death. And so in that second letter, Paul is talking to the church at Corinth, and he says these words. In that chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, Paul says, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. But let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. Just like God is not going to make any one of us in this life bow down before him and call him Lord, he's going to leave that up to you. You have the freedom of choice. You can choose whether to submit to God or not. He is a perfect gentleman in that. He will not force you to do anything in this life, but he simply asks you, out of your heart, will you receive me? Out of your heart, will you bow down before me and serve me? I want you to choose me. I'm not going to force you to choose me. Now that's in this life. Friends, let me add a little footnote to this. In the life to come, Jesus says every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess. I want to bow in this life. So in the life to come, I'm used to it. That's the natural posture for me, submitting to the Lord. But one day, every knee is going to bow and confess that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God. But today, we're given an opportunity, the freedom to choose to accept him or not. The same is true with our finances. The instruction that we get is you can choose to give or not. But if you choose not to, you cannot expect God to bless you. That would just be ludicrous. God is not going to bless anything that is contrary to His will. He will do some strange things with obedience. Things that just don't make sense, like Jay was talking about Sunlight Christian Church over in Gonavise, Haiti. You know, some things that's happened over there that just defies logic because God is in it. I love that old gospel song, "Little is much when God is in it." And I believe that. And so with our finances, He says, I don't want you to give out of compulsion. You know, let's put this in a parental application today. We don't want our kids to obey us simply because they know that they're going to be punished if they don't. We want them to obey us as parents because they love us and they trust us. Sometimes those times are rare, they're few and far between, but when they happen, we love them, don't we? We love them because it just shows that they're obeying us out of the way their heart is, the freedom that they have. And that's the way God looks at our giving. He wants us to simply trust Him. And friends, I will tell you, and I believe the leadership at this church will back me up on this. If you will step out of your comfort zone and you will say, I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm going to believe and trust in what Jesus said, and I'm going to up what I give to the Lord. And if it goes bad, let's just say that all of a sudden you give an extra 5%, and then 2 months later you're about busted. Something just totally happened. I believe the leadership in this church will step up and help you and say, hey, okay. But you know what? If you put that to the test, I would dare say that you won't have to come for the leadership of the church. Because God is going to honor that obedience. Because you are going to be doing the things that show that you put Him first. And again, if we look at our possessions, our material goods, our finances, in that way and say, God, I'm going to put you first in them, He is going to bless you. I promise you, He is going to bless you. Now, I'm not saying you're going to have a windfall of resources and be able to go out and buy that beach home. You may not need that second home. Matter of fact, I'm going to tell you right up front, you do not need that second home. You can't be in but one at a time, right? But I will say that your needs will be met. God works in some very mysterious ways. Sometimes Jesus speaks and calms the storm outside. Most of the time, Jesus will speak and calm the storm inside. So I'm praying for that for you, that He will calm that storm of insecurity and doubt, and He'll give you strength as you look at your resources and say, God, I'm going to make a change. I'm going to seek you first and your kingdom and your righteousness, knowing that if I do that, all the other things that I need will be given to me. So last question I have for you. If this is an act of worship, you're giving back of your resources to the Lord, do you worship, trust, and honor God like you should? Only you know that. I'm so thankful that I don't have a clue what anybody gives. To be honest with you, I don't even know what my family gives. It's up to them. I'm glad I don't. But the Lord knows. So are we honoring Him? Are we worshiping Him? Are we doing it cheerfully? Or we feel like, oh man, I hate to reach back in to get my pocketbook out. He said He doesn't want you to give under compulsion. He wants you to give with a joyful heart. And as I've said many times through this series, the most important thing that you can give to Him is not your resources. He owns them all anyway. Most important thing you can give Him is yourself. Because He is waiting there with His arms open, to welcome you home. And so this morning, as we conclude our time of worship, have you given him yourself? Because if you haven't done that, there is no hope. There's only fear of what tomorrow holds. Jesus, outside of him, there is no safety. Inside of him, there is no fear. If you need to respond, would you do that as we stand and sing together?